On a winter morning in Cedar Creek, when snow fell like quiet secrets from the sky, a little girl walked alone toward her school, her dress too thin for the cold, her steps too small for the weight she carried. No one knew that behind those tired eyes was a truth everyone had refused to believe, and no one knew that, on this very day, a storm would bring more than wind and snow. It would bring justice. Because somewhere beyond the ridge, a police SUV was racing home, and beside it ran a German shepherd whose instincts never lied. If you're watching this right now, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and may your day be filled with warmth, kindness, and a little bit of light, no matter how cold the world feels today. Early winter arrived in Cedar Creek like a quiet visitor who refused to knock. Snow clung stubbornly to the rooftops of the sleepy mountain town, turning the pine-covered hills into pale silhouettes beneath a sky the color of a faded bruise. The air carried the scent of cold metal and wet bark, an aroma familiar to anyone who had lived long enough in these valleys. Cedar Creek was a place where time moved slowly, where the mountains felt older than memory itself, and where secrets often drifted unnoticed beneath layers of frost. On this particular morning, mist lingered low, rolling like thin ghosts along the sidewalks. The children of Northridge Elementary trudged toward the school entrance in thick jackets and bright scarves, their laughter rising in quick bursts. Yet, among the clusters of chatter and footstep crunches, one small figure moved alone. Mara Wynne, 7 years old, slight, with messy chestnut curls escaping from a thin elastic band, walked carefully, almost timidly, through the snow-dusted courtyard. Her old green dress hung awkwardly on her tiny frame, too large at the shoulders and frayed at the hem. Her shoes, scuffed and peeling at the edges, looked as if they had marched through too many winters already. She kept her arms close to her chest, not just because of the cold, but because she always felt as though the world was ready to judge the way she held herself. Mara was a gentle child, soft-voiced, thoughtful, quick to apologize for things that were never her fault. People often said she had the eyes of someone who listens too much, eyes shaped by rooms where she never quite belonged. She was the sort of child who whispered to stray cats, who collected fallen feathers, who believed every sunrise carried a promise meant specifically for her. But today, like many days before, that promise seemed to dim beneath the clouded morning. As she crossed the courtyard, a few students paused to stare. Some whispered behind gloved hands. There she is, the girl who says her dad is the sheriff. Yeah, but her lunch account is always empty. If he's a sheriff, why is she dressed like that? She lies for attention. Everyone knows that. Their words were small, but they sliced like thin ice. Mara pretended not to hear, but her shoulders curled inward, betraying her effort to stay invisible. She clutched the strap of her faded backpack, decorated with peeling patches of cartoon animals. One patch, a wolf with a tiny police hat, was the only one still intact. Her father had given it to her. Her father. The thought made her chest tighten. Sergeant Elias Wynne was not just the town's sheriff. He was a presence carved from the same mountains that surrounded Cedar Creek. A tall man in his late 30s with strong shoulders and a square jaw softened only by a neatly kept beard, he carried the quiet gravity of someone who had seen too much and still chose kindness. His eyes, clear, steady gray, held both warmth and storm. He had once been a patrol officer in a larger city, but a tragic incident involving a reckless drunk driver who had taken the life of a partner had pushed him to seek refuge in quieter places. Cedar Creek became that refuge. Despite his strength, Elias was gentle with children, especially with Mara. He often knelt to her height when speaking, believing the world would be a kinder place if adults remembered how small a child's view could be. And he never went anywhere without Blaze. Blaze was a 5-year-old male German shepherd, black and tan, broad-chested, with intense amber eyes that seemed to read human emotions better than most adults. He was a K9 rescue dog trained in search and recovery, a loyal soldier of the mountains. Though trained for high-stress missions, Blaze had a soft temperament with children. He often curled around Mara at night when storms rolled across the valley, placing his head gently against her knee like a living shield. But these days, Mara rarely saw Blaze, or her father. Elias had left for a cross-county assignment a week ago. He promised to call every night, but communication from the snow-covered ridge had been unreliable. Mara held on to the last words he said to her before leaving. "You're my brave girl. Take care of yourself until Daddy and Blaze get home." The memory warmed her for a moment, until the front door of the school swung open. Standing near the entrance was Fiona Wynne, Mara's stepmother, a woman in her late 30s, tall and slim, with sharp cheekbones and impeccably styled blonde hair. She wore a fitted gray coat that seemed too elegant for Cedar Creek's modest charm. Fiona had a precise face, every expression calculated, every smile rehearsed. She carried herself with the rigid grace of someone who had spent years trying to be admired, but secretly feared scrutiny. Her blue eyes were cold, not out of malice, but out of habit. She saw the world as something that should serve her, not something she should nurture. Once Fiona had been warm. Years ago, before the financial collapse of her family's business and the humiliation that followed, she had been known as a compassionate secretary at the courthouse. But the shame of losing her status hardened her. In her, insecurity fermented into bitterness, and bitterness into control. Mara, quiet, needy, and undeniably loved by Elias, became an easy target for Fiona's resentment. Fiona never laid a hand on Mara, but she wielded neglect like a blade. She withheld lunches, dismissed worries, and snapped any time Mara mentioned missing her father. She believed Elias spoiled Mara too much, and she resented the way Blaze adored the child over her. Blaze, in turn, growled whenever Fiona approached Mara too harshly. Fiona hated the dog for that. Now, Fiona leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone with a gaze that occasionally flicked toward Mara with thinly veiled impatience. "You're late," she said, her voice flat, cold as the wind that slipped through the courtyard. I'm sorry," Mara murmured. "Just go inside. And don't forget, no more stories about your father. People are tired of hearing nonsense." Mara lowered her head. "But I wasn't lying." Fiona ignored her and walked away, heels clacking on the frozen pavement. Inside the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Posters of snowmen and multiplication tables lined the walls. But for Mara, the world felt smaller, dimmer, as though someone had lowered the brightness of her life. She moved quietly to her classroom. Miss Hargrove, her teacher, a woman in her mid-50s with a tightly pinned bun and spectacles perched on her sharp nose, watched Mara enter. Miss Hargrove had a stern face and a personality to match, rule-bound, impatient with children who didn't meet her expectations, convinced that hardship built character. But beneath her rigidity was a woman shaped by a painful loss. Her only son, a soldier, had died overseas 10 years ago. Since then, she had adopted an almost military discipline in her classroom. Unfortunately, empathy often drowned under that discipline. "You're late again, Mara," Miss Hargrove said, without looking up from her attendance sheet. I'm sorry," Mara whispered. Some children snickered. Mara slipped into her seat. The lesson began. Words swam across the chalkboard, but Mara's stomach growled, loud enough for the boy beside her to smirk. "Didn't eat again?" he whispered. Mara shook her head. At recess, she sat alone near the fence, tracing circles in the frost with her fingertip. She wished her father were here. She wished Blaze were nudging her hand, encouraging her to smile. She wished someone believed her. A shadow fell across the ground. It was Miss Rowan, the school librarian. Miss Rowan was a woman in her early 40s, short and round-faced, with warm brown skin and lively dark eyes. She wore sweaters with embroidered flowers and always smelled faintly of cinnamon tea. Unlike many staff members, she remembered every student's name and every child's quiet hurt. "Mara, sweetheart," she said gently, "you didn't eat lunch again today." Mara shook her head, twisting her fingers. Miss Rowan crouched beside her, lowering her voice. "Do you want to talk about anything?" Mara hesitated, lips trembling. "No one believes me." "About Daddy." Miss Rowan placed a comforting hand on the child's shoulder, her gaze deep with understanding. "Truth doesn't need a crowd to stand. Sometimes it just needs time." Mara swallowed, blinking fast. The wind howled softly between the pine trees. A storm was brewing somewhere far beyond the ridge. Mara did not know it yet. Neither did Fiona, nor Miss Hargrove, nor the children mocking her. But that storm carried something. With it, something that would break open every lie buried beneath Cedar Creek's snow. A familiar rumble echoed faintly in the distance, too far for anyone to notice. But Blaze would have heard it. And if Blaze heard it, then Elias wasn't far behind. The sky above Cedar Creek thickened with clouds, as if preparing the stage for the truth to return. The storm rolled into Cedar Creek quietly at first, dragging a blanket of gray across the sky, as though someone were dimming the world on purpose. The pines swayed in slow, uneasy arcs, whispering to one another in the wind like old friends unwilling to share a secret aloud. Snow began to fall in thin, hesitant flakes, soft, almost reluctant. It was the kind of morning that made even the birds question whether it was worth leaving their nests. But inside the Wynn household, there were no birdsong questions, only silence thick as frost. Mara Wynn sat at the dining table with her small hands cupped around a chipped mug of lukewarm water. Her frayed green dress from yesterday remained unwashed. Fiona had tossed it onto a pile overnight with a dismissive gesture, muttering something about children ruining perfectly good mornings. The house bore a stillness that belonged neither to peace nor rest. It was the stillness of rooms that watched too much and spoke too little. The silence felt alive. Fiona Wynn appeared at the foot of the stairs, her heels tapping with a restless rhythm. Today she wore a fitted maroon sweater and black leggings, chosen not for warmth, but to accentuate her height and slim figure. Her hair, always curled just slightly at the ends, was pulled into a loose ponytail, meant to look effortless, though it certainly wasn't. Her face was beautiful in a sharp, practiced way, but the tension around her eyebrows betrayed whatever storm brewed inside her. A woman who once aspired to effortless grace was now a creature stitched together with pressure and pride. She tapped her nails on the counter. "Get ready. You're going to be late again, and I refuse to hear the school complain a second time." Mara nodded, but said nothing. She had learned the pattern. Silence kept storms from worsening. "You didn't eat," Fiona added without turning, though her tone made it clear she didn't intend to offer food. A child should be responsible for waking up early enough to take care of herself. Mara lowered her gaze. "Yes, ma'am." The words tasted small. While Fiona rummaged through her handbag, the front window rattled, wind scraping cold fingers across the glass. Cedar Creek was changing. Mara could feel it, though she couldn't explain how. As Fiona ushered Mara to the car, a figure appeared on the sidewalk. Old Mr. Garrison, the neighbor across the street. He was a retired mailman in his 70s, short and slightly bent at the shoulders, with a large gray mustache that hid most of his expressions. He walked with a limp from an old injury during a blizzard 30 years earlier. Kids found him grumpy, but that wasn't quite true. He was simply a man shaped by winters that had taken too much and returned too little. He raised a stiff hand as they passed. Storms brewing harder today should keep the little one warm. His voice was gravel, softened by age. Fiona forced a brittle smile. "She's fine, thank you." Mr. Garrison's eyes shifted to Mara, lingering a second too long. He had lived long enough to sense when a child carried a silence that didn't belong to her. "Morning, Mara." She gave a small wave. "Morning, sir." Fiona opened the car door with a hint of annoyance at the unnecessary delay, and within moments they were off, driving through the snow-lined streets toward Northridge Elementary. The school felt colder than the air outside, though heaters hummed through the hallways. Children hurried past Mara, eager to escape the biting wind. As she stepped through the doors, laughter echoed from somewhere deeper inside. Not all laughter is cruel, but Mara had learned to tell the difference. The second she entered her classroom, Miss Hargrove's gaze snapped toward her, with the precision of someone visually correcting imperfections in the world. "Late." "Sorry," Mara murmured. Before Miss Hargrove could reply, another teacher entered. The school counselor, Mrs. June Calloway, a woman in her early 50s with short salt and pepper hair that curled naturally around her ears and soft brown eyes hidden behind large blue-framed glasses. She carried a gentle roundness to her face, the kind that came from years of smiling at children who arrived with burdens too heavy. Her clothing always seemed mismatched, not by carelessness, but by personality. Pastel scarves with plaid skirts, knitted cardigans with floral shirts. She was a caregiver, stitched together with kindness and eccentricity. "Miss Hargrove," she said warmly, I need to speak with you about the new schedule for the literacy program. Miss Hargrove nodded stiffly, leaving the room with her. Mara slid into her seat. For a moment things were quiet. Then a boy named Trevor, tall, freckled, and louder than he needed to be, leaned over. "Did your sheriff daddy buy you new clothes yet?" He snorted. "Or is he too busy arresting imaginary bad guys?" A few children tittered. Mara squeezed her pencil. "My dad is real." Trevor rolled his eyes. "Sure." But before he could continue, Mrs. Calloway peeked back into the room and caught the tail end of the exchange. Her gaze sharpened, not harsh, just perceptive, like someone who had seen this dance too many times. Mara didn't notice, but Calloway filed it silently away. Recess brought the kind of cold that bit through coats. Children ran across the yard, their boots thumping through slush. Mara found a quiet spot behind the playground, near the old wooden fence. She pulled out her small drawing notebook, worn edges, smudged cover, and started sketching Blaze from memory, trying to capture the way his ears perked when he heard her voice. But a gust of wind tore a page from the notebook and sent it tumbling. Mara rushed to grab it, but someone stepped on it first. Trevor. He smirked down at the drawing. "Who's this? Your pretend dog?" "He's real," Mara whispered. Trevor lifted the page. "Does he pretend to eat imaginary food with imaginary money too?" Before Mara could respond, someone stepped between them. Miss Rowan. Her cinnamon tea scent was almost comforting. She knelt slightly so her eyes met Trevor's. "Return the drawing." Trevor hesitated. Miss Rowan didn't raise her voice, but something in her steady gaze coaxed obedience. He dropped the page and ran off. Mara hugged her notebook. "Thank you." "You don't owe me thanks," Rowan said softly. "You deserve kindness, that's all." As she stood, the sky grumbled faintly. Snowflakes thickened, swirling like feathers of some unseen bird shaking out its wings. Meanwhile, 12 miles beyond Cedar Creek, Sergeant Elias Wynne steered his SUV along a narrow mountain road. Blaze sat alert in the passenger seat, ears pricked, amber eyes scanning the shifting storm outside the window. The German shepherd had sensed something wrong for days, an unease he couldn't explain. Blaze never whined, but last night he had paced the cabin floor relentlessly, nose pressed to the door, as if urging Elias to leave sooner. Elias tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You feel it too, boy?" Blaze lowered his head, ears tilting back, an answer as clear as any words. A man in his late 30s, Elias carried the bearing of someone who had found strength not in victories, but in surviving losses. His quiet resolve came from years on the force, and from the incident that had haunted him since his city days. The night a drunk driver took more than a life. It took a part of Elias that laughter could never fully restore. Perhaps that was why he chose Cedar Creek, a quieter place where each sunrise didn't feel like a battlefield. But now, something gnawed at him. Something wrong. He pressed the accelerator. At Northridge Elementary, lunchtime arrived, but for Mara, it arrived without food. The cafeteria worker, Mrs. Dottie Reeves, a plump woman in her 60s with rosy cheeks, a messy bun, and a soft spot for gossip, checked Mara's name on the roster. Her voice softened, but the rules held firm. "Sweetheart, your account's still unpaid." Mara nodded, pretending to understand. "It's okay." She stepped aside and filled a cup with water to quiet her stomach. Dottie watched her go, frowning. She had served food in this school for decades, long enough to recognize the difference between a child skipping lunch and a child starving silently. She made a mental note to talk to Principal Avery Hayes about it later. Principal Hayes, mid-40s, mixed race, tall with calming, deep-set eyes and close-cropped black hair, was known for fairness. He dressed plainly, spoke gently, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who preferred resolving conflict rather than commanding obedience. He had once been a teacher before stepping into administration, and though responsibilities pulled him away from classrooms, he never forgot the weight carried by vulnerable children. The only challenge was, he rarely received accurate reports from staff who filtered information through their own biases. But today would be different. Dottie Reeves, unlike many in Cedar Creek, did not tolerate injustice. When school ended, Fiona arrived 20 minutes late. She didn't apologize. She rarely did. Mara climbed into the back seat. The car smelled faintly of Fiona's perfume, lavender and something metallic underneath. As they drove away, Mara noticed Mr. Garrison shoveling his walkway despite the snow thickening. He paused when he saw the car, offering her a small, quiet nod. A nod that said more than words, a nod that understood. At home, Fiona retreated to her bedroom, muttering about incompetent school staff and unnecessary stress. Mara slipped into the living room, clutching her notebook as though it were a shield. She began to draw again, Blaze's eyes, her father's hands, the badge that gleamed proudly on his chest. Outside, the storm gathered strength. Wind whistled through the siding, tapping like restless fingers. The world seemed poised, waiting. And somewhere on the road, Sergeant Elias Wynne pressed harder on the gas. He was coming home. He just didn't know how desperately Cedar Creek needed him. Morning arrived in Cedar Creek with a bruised sky and a restless wind that scraped against rooftops like a warning no one had asked for. Snowflakes drifted sideways, whipped by unpredictable gusts that carried the scent of pine resin and something sharper, change. The storm that had been building for 2 days now crawled over the valley with a kind of intelligence, as if searching for the one place where truth had been forced too long into silence. Inside Northridge Elementary, fluorescent lights flickered against the growing gloom. The hallways buzzed with the clatter of boots and the soft rustle of backpacks. But there was an undercurrent of unease. Teachers spoke in hushed tones about worsening weather, and younger children clung to coat sleeves as if sensing trouble in the air. Mara Wynne stood at her locker, her thin fingers tracing the edge of a torn sticker shaped like a pine tree. She was exhausted, physically hollow from skipping meals, and emotionally frayed from trying to survive each school day unnoticed. Her green dress, though patched at the hem after Fiona's irritated sewing the previous night, still clung to her knees awkwardly. Her curls, damp from the snow, framed her face in tangled dark strands. She had drawn only 2 things late last night: Blaze's amber eyes and the storm clouds gathering behind the mountain ridge. Somehow, both felt connected. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Is that really what you're wearing again?" Mara turned. It was Eliza Reed, a girl in her grade. Eliza was tall for 8 years old, with caramel-colored hair tied in a glossy braid, and a winter jacket decorated with glittering silver stars. She belonged to one of Cedar Creek's more outspoken families, the kind who thought reputation was currency and gossip was small-town oxygen. Eliza wasn't cruel by nature, but she absorbed her mother's habits like chalk dust. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowed with distaste. "You know, my mom said your stepmom tried her best, but you're just difficult." Mara blinked. She had heard this phrase too many times. "I'm not difficult." Eliza shrugged. "That's not what adults say." Before Mara could respond, footsteps approached. Miss Rowan, the librarian, appeared at the end of the hall carrying a box of donated books. Her warm brown eyes softened when she saw Mara. "Good morning, sweetheart." Eliza backed away slightly. Miss Rowan had that effect, kindness wrapped around quiet authority. She moved toward Mara and lowered her voice. "Are you feeling all right?" Mara nodded, though the truth trembled beneath her ribs. "Yes, ma'am." But Rowan recognized the hesitation. Years in a school library had attuned her to the silent language of hurting children. Before they could speak further, a sudden metallic crack echoed from outside as a gust of icy wind slammed a door somewhere in the courtyard. Everyone flinched. Miss Rowan glanced toward the windows, brows knitting. The storm's moving faster than they predicted. She placed a hand gently on Mara's back. "Go to class. I'll check on you later." Inside the classroom, Miss Hargrove marched to the chalkboard with her usual clipped steps. She wore a knitted navy sweater today, sleeves rolled tightly to her elbows, revealing thin wrists and a silver bracelet engraved with military stars, her late son's. Her face, stern as ever, betrayed no hint of softness as she snapped the chalk in half between her fingers. "Today we begin with our reading quiz." Groans rippled through the class, but Mara just tightened her grip on her pencil. She wasn't afraid of quizzes. She was afraid of being noticed failing one. Her stomach churned again, reminding her she had eaten only half a slice of stale bread Fiona left on the table, muttering something about earning proper meals. As Miss Hargrove passed between desks distributing papers, the door opened and someone slipped inside. It was Officer Darren Cole, the school resource officer, a tall, sandy-haired man in his early 40s with a kind jawline and an old-fashioned politeness that made him seem almost out of place in the modern world. He wore a Navy patrol coat dusted with snow and carried a clipboard under his arm. His presence was steady and calm, much like the man himself. After 15 years on the Cedar Creek force, he had developed a quiet intuition for trouble and a soft spot for overlooked children. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, voice gentle. "Principal Hayes asked me to check on a few students with irregular attendance notes." Miss Hargrove stiffened. "We're about to begin a quiz, Officer Cole." "It'll take a moment," he assured. His eyes scanned the room until they settled on Mara. He hesitated. Only slightly, but enough for Mara's heart to sink. "Mara Wynne," he said softly. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" A whispering wave spread across the class. Mara's throat tightened. Miss Hargrove looked annoyed, but motioned for Mara to go. Mara followed Officer Cole into the hallway, her small boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. He crouched slightly to meet her height, his expression calm but concerned. "Mara, sweetheart, Principal Hayes received a message that your father's been out of contact for almost a week. Is that true?" She blinked up at him. "He's working. He said he'll come home soon." He nodded slowly. "I understand. Your father's a good man." He paused. "But the school has other concerns too, like your lunches and your clothing. Do you feel safe at home?" The question hung in the cold air. Before Mara could answer, Miss Rowan hurried around the corner, holding a small stack of overdue forms. Her expression shifted when she saw Mara's wide eyes and Officer Cole's gentle but probing posture. "Everything all right here?" Rowan asked. Cole stood. "Just checking in, following protocol." Rowan nodded, though her gaze lingered on Mara. She recognized something new in the girl's face. Not just worry, but fear edged with a fragile kind of hope. A hope that someone might finally listen. Recess came early due to the storm. The sky darkened, and teachers hurried children indoors as the wind roared with growing ferocity. Mara stood near the classroom window, watching the snow swirl like 1,000 restless spirits. Across the yard, she spotted Mr. Garrison, the elderly neighbor, struggling to secure his trash bins as the wind knocked them over. His heavy coat billowed, and his limp made the effort painfully slow. Mara pressed her hand to the glass. She wished she could help, but rules kept children indoors during extreme weather. A new voice startled her. Worried about the old man? It was Nina Alvarez, a new transfer student who had joined the class only 2 days earlier. Nina was 9, short and sturdy, with caramel skin and a mass of tight curls escaping from under her purple beanie. She wore a thick puffer jacket splattered with paint spots and smelled faintly of citrus shampoo. Nina was bold, not unkind, just braver than most children her age. She had moved to Cedar Creek after her mother lost a job in the city. Stress had seen the family start over in the mountains, and Nina carried a certain resilience that came from watching adults rebuild their lives. "He looks like he needs help," Mara murmured. "Yeah," Nina agreed. "But teachers won't let us outside. Liability or whatever." Mara looked at her curiously. Nina shrugged and whispered, "I'm good at reading adults. They panic easy." The two girls stood in silence for a moment, an unexpected alliance forming in the storm's shadow. Hours passed, the storm thickened, and in the growing blizzard, a dark SUV crawled over the ridge road, its headlights cutting through sheets of white. Inside, Blaze's ears shot up. He stood, bracing himself against the dashboard, whining low in his throat. Sergeant Elias Wynne narrowed his eyes at the road ahead. "What is it, boy?" Blaze pressed his paw against the window, as if pointing towards Cedar Creek. His fur bristled, every instinct alert. Elias's stomach tightened. Blaze had never reacted like this unless something was wrong. He pressed the accelerator. Back at school, dismissal time arrived early due to the worsening storm. Parents hurried into the lobby, snow-dusted and anxious. Children flooded into the hallway, grabbing backpacks, boots squeaking and coats rustling. Fiona Wynne was not among them. Minutes turned into 20. Mara stood alone near the front doors, shivering beneath the weak hallway heater. Miss Rowan approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Mara, did your stepmother say she'd be late?" Mara shook her head. "She doesn't tell me things." A shadow passed over Rowan's face. Principal Hayes appeared then, tall, steady, his presence warm in contrast to the icy chaos outside. He paused when he saw Mara alone. "Sweetheart, where's your guardian?" "She didn't come yet." Hayes nodded slowly. "You can wait in my office until she arrives." But before anyone could move, something happened that made entire conversations freeze mid-sentence. Blaze's bark echoed outside, loud, sharp, urgent. Everyone turned. Through the glass doors, headlights cut through the swirling storm. Elias Wynne had arrived, and nothing in Cedar Creek would stay silent much longer. The storm's roar thundered against the front doors of Northridge Elementary, as if the wind itself demanded entrance. Snow battered the glass in frantic flurries, and the lobby, usually filled with chatter during dismissal, went silent. Children clutched their backpacks. Parents paused mid-step. Even the overhead lights seemed to flicker in anticipation. For a moment, time became a held breath. Then came the bark. It cut through the storm like a blade, sharp, commanding, unmistakable. Blaze. Mara froze. Her heart surged like something newly awakened. Miss Rowan instinctively stepped closer to her, sensing the tremor of hope and fear mixing inside the child's small frame. Principal Hayes, standing near the front office, pushed open the glass door. The blast of wind shoved against him, whipping snow into the entryway. Through the swirling white, a dark SUV rolled to a stop, headlights dimmed by the blizzard. A tall figure stepped out. Sergeant Elias Wynne. His coat dusted with snow, his beard frosted at the edges, his eyes burning with a fury he rarely let the world see. Blaze leapt out a moment later, muscular, alert, and magnificent in the storm's chaos, his black and tan fur bristling, amber eyes scanning for one person only. Mara. She took 2 trembling steps toward the door before stopping, as though afraid the image would shatter if she moved too fast. Blaze saw her first. The German shepherd bounded forward, paws hitting the snow with urgent force, tail rigid with emotion. He reached the doorway and pushed his muzzle into Mara's hands as she fell to her knees, clutching him fiercely, burying her face in his warm neck. The storm howled, but inside, the world shifted. Elias reached the entrance seconds later. Snow clung to his eyelashes. His breath steamed in heavy clouds. When he saw Mara curled against Blaze, something inside him broke and mended at the same time. "Mara!" His voice cracked as he knelt, hands gently framing her face. "Sweetheart, what happened to you?" Mara opened her mouth, but the words tangled with tears. She clung to his coat, holding on to him as if anchoring herself to reality. Principal Hayes stepped forward. "Sergeant Wynne, we didn't expect—" Elias stood, his voice controlled but trembling with contained emotion. "Where's her guardian?" "She hasn't arrived," Hayes admitted. "We were just preparing to call." Miss Rowan stepped in gently. "She's been alone for nearly half an hour." Those words made Elias stiffen. Blaze growled softly, sensing the tension. Before anyone could speak again, the lobby doors whipped open and a gust of cold swept inside, along with Fiona Wynne, disheveled and breathless, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She wore a white faux fur coat and carried her phone pressed to her ear, though she wasn't talking to anyone. Her eyes widened when she saw Elias. The phone dropped from her fingers. You're home early," she stammered. "Early enough," Elias replied, voice low. Fiona's gaze darted to Mara, then to Blaze, then back to Elias. Her perfect composure cracked like thin ice. "It's not what it looks like," she began, voice pitching up. "There have been misunderstandings." Elias took a step toward her. Blaze moved too, placing himself subtly between the child and the woman. "What misunderstandings?" Elias said quietly, dangerously. Before Fiona could answer, another figure hurried from the hallway. Officer Darren Cole, the school resource officer, shoulders dusted with flakes from checking the parking lot. He paused, taking in the tableau, Elias, tense and storm-eyed. Fiona shrinking back, Mara clinging to Blaze. Teachers frozen in stunned silence. "Sergeant Wynne," Cole said, nodding respectfully. "We were about to call you. There have been concerns." Elias turned sharply. "What concerns?" Principal Hayes stepped closer, his steady voice attempting to anchor the chaos. "Sergeant, several staff members have reported troubling signs. Missing lunches, improper clothing, fatigue, unpaid school accounts." Fiona cut in, waving her arms dramatically. "That's all exaggerated. Children lie. Mara has never lied." Elias's voice shook with anger, a storm inside the storm. The entire lobby went still. Fiona's expression twitched. "You're taking her side? Over me?" "Over the truth," he said. A heavy silence settled like falling snow. In the corner of the lobby, two teachers whispered anxiously. A custodian paused his sweeping, broom hovering midair. Even a small boy stopped crying mid-sob to stare at the unfolding confrontation. And then a new voice spoke. "Sergeant Wynne," Hayes said gently. "Would you like to speak with Mrs. Reeves? She informed me earlier that Mara hasn't been able to purchase lunch for nearly a week." Elias's stomach twisted. Mrs. Dottie Reeves entered from the cafeteria hallway just then, plump, rosy-cheeked, still wearing her hairnet. Her usual warmth dimmed with concern. "I didn't want to assume anything," she said softly, "but the child hasn't eaten properly in days." Elias turned slowly toward Fiona. She took a step back. I've been overwhelmed. You don't understand." "Help me understand," Elias said, voice quieter now, far more dangerous. Fiona faltered. At that moment, the door opened again, and another parent rushed inside. A woman named Sherilyn Moore, known for her sharp face, bright lipstick, and love of dramatics. She stopped abruptly at the sight of Elias, smoothing her coat and blinking in awkward surprise. "I thought I heard shouting," she said, but her eyes betrayed eagerness for gossip. Elias ignored her. He knelt beside Mara again, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Sweetheart, did anyone hurt you? Did anyone deny you food? Did anyone call you a liar?" Mara swallowed hard. Her small voice trembled. "I tried to tell them, Daddy, but no one believed me." Blaze nudged her hand, whining softly. A tear rolled down Elias's cheek, rare, raw. He stood abruptly and faced the adults in the room. "From now on," he said, voice strong as granite, "my daughter speaks, and people listen." The tension broke when Miss Rowan stepped forward with a trembling breath. "Sergeant Wynne," she said, "Mara has been incredibly brave through all of this. She never once complained. She just kept trying her best." Elias nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thank you. You saw her when I couldn't." Rowan's eyes misted. Principal Hayes cleared his throat. "Fiona Wynne, we need to discuss your failure to respond to the school's repeated communications." Fiona bristled. "This is absurd." "And," Hayes continued, "your withholding of funds meant for Mara's care." Gasps threaded the space. Officer Cole stepped forward. "Ma'am, if necessary, Child Protective Services may become involved." Fiona paled. "I didn't hurt her," she cried. I just didn't think she needed so much pampering." "Pampering," Elias repeated, voice soft as snow and twice as cold. "Feeding a child is not pampering." Fiona froze. Cole exhaled deeply. "Sergeant, would you like to take Mara home?" Elias didn't hesitate. He scooped Mara into his arms. She clung to his coat like a lifeline, Blaze pressing his body protectively against her leg. Principal Hayes nodded respectfully as Elias passed. "We'll follow up immediately. I promise you that." Elias gave a curt nod and pushed open the door. The storm had eased slightly, as if bowing in the presence of something stronger. Father, daughter, and dog stepped into the swirling snow together. One broken, one determined, one guarding. For the first time in weeks, Mara breathed without fear. Snow still drifted lazily over Cedar Creek as Elias carried Mara out of the school lobby, Blaze pressing close against his leg with a mixture of vigilance and relief. The worst of the storm had passed, but the world remained coated in white, silent, reflective, as if the town itself were waiting to exhale after holding its breath for too long. The streetlights flickered through the haze, glowing like wounded lanterns along the road. Elias buckled Mara gently into the back seat of his SUV. Blaze leapt inside after her, positioning himself so that his flank touched her knee. The dog kept his gaze trained on the school doors, watching for Fiona as though expecting one last attack. Mara rested her hand on his shoulder, fingers buried in his thick fur. For the first time in days, her trembling eased. Elias sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. He turned toward her, studying her face carefully. There were faint shadows under her eyes, subtle traces of sleepless nights, and her cheeks were pale. No child should look so tired. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "you're safe. You're coming home with me. No more cold lunches, no more waiting alone." Mara nodded. Blaze's tail thumped once in agreement. Only then did Elias turn the key. The engine hummed alive, and they drove away from the school, leaving behind a lobby full of questions, guilt, whispers, and the first small stirrings of justice. They reached the neighborhood just as snowplows began clearing the roads. Warm lights from nearby homes flickered through windows, creating small pockets of comfort in the cold evening. But the Wynn house, the two-story cabin with faded blue shutters, sat dark. Fiona had left hurriedly after the confrontation, and the house now felt hollow, without her presence stirring restlessness and tension. Elias unlocked the door and stepped inside with Mara pressed close to his side. Blaze darted in first, sniffing corners, tail raised, doing what he always did, ensuring safety. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of old pine wood, with a lingering coldness from unopened vents. Elias switched on the heater, the vents groaning awake. He turned on the kitchen lights next. Everything was exactly as he feared, dishes piled in the sink, crumbs scattered across the counter, a half-empty mug of cold coffee abandoned near the stove. Fiona hadn't been cooking. She hadn't been feeding Mara. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Daddy?" Mara whispered, sensing his tension. "Everything's all right," he murmured, though his chest clenched with guilt. "Let's get you warm." While she sat at the table, Blaze curled at her feet, his favorite place since she was old enough to toddle. Elias opened the refrigerator, scanning its sparse contents. A few eggs, a carton of milk half full, unevenly sliced bread, nothing else. He closed the door and took a steady breath. "How about eggs and toast, Daddy's specialty?" Mara smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling with fragile hope. "Okay." As Elias cooked, another figure approached the house, a neighbor from across the street. The doorbell rang once, twice. Elias wiped his hands on a towel before answering. Old Mr. Garrison stood on the porch, bundled in a thick brown parka and carrying a snow shovel. His gray mustache twitched as he peered inside, his breath fogging the air. He looked uncomfortable, as if unsure whether he was stepping out of line. "Evening, Elias," he said gruffly. "Saw your car. Wanted to check in. The storm's nasty. Roads are a mess." Garrison was a man shaped by winters and losses. His wife had passed 15 years earlier in a sudden avalanche during a climb. Since then, he'd developed a habit of checking on neighbors whenever bad weather hit. He masked compassion with curtness, the way some men hid softness inside bark. Elias nodded. "Thanks for coming." Garrison glanced past him, noticing the dim lights and the absence of Fiona. His brows furrowed. "Everything all right?" Elias hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. But then Mara peeked around his leg, Blaze at her heel. The sight made the old man's shoulders soften. "We're okay," Elias said simply. "Just sorting things out." Garrison nodded slowly, instinctively protective. "If you need anything, tools, food, help, knock on my door. You hear?" Elias's voice warmed. "I will, thank you." Back inside, Mara sat at the table, staring at the scrambled eggs steaming on her plate. She took the first bite with tearful tenderness, savoring each warm mouthful like someone receiving proof that they mattered. Elias watched silently, guilt and love merging into one. After dinner, he tucked her into bed, but her room was still cluttered with oversized clothes and broken toys Fiona had forced her to use. Elias knelt down beside her. "We'll fix this room tomorrow. Every corner, Every drawer. Mara whispered, "Can we make it blue, like the lake you promised we'd see?" Elias smiled softly. "Any color you want." Blaze jumped onto the bed, breaking a rule Fiona used to enforce harshly, and curled beside Mara. Elias didn't stop him. He stroked Mara's hair until her breathing steadied. Only when she slept did he step into the hallway and let the weight of reality finally settle. The next morning, Cedar Creek woke under skies washed pale with early sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving fresh snow blanketing the streets like a new beginning. Elias brewed coffee, while Mara and Blaze sat together on the living room rug, reading picture books. A knock sounded at the door. It was Principal Avery Hayes, tall and solemn in a dark winter coat dusted with frost. He held a folder under his arm. Behind him was Mrs. Dottie Reeves, the cafeteria worker, holding a small paper bag. "I brought something." "For Mara," Reeves said softly. "Just something warm for breakfast?" Hayes cleared his throat. "Sergeant Wynne, we owe you an apology, many, in fact. There were signs we missed, things we should have questioned sooner." His voice held the weight of responsibility. Elias nodded gravely. "What matters now is fixing what's broken." Hayes stepped inside and laid the folder on the table. "We're launching a formal investigation into the school records and into your wife's actions." Elias exhaled slowly. "She won't be staying here anymore." Blaze growled softly, sensing tension. Reeves crouched beside Mara with a warm smile. "We're all proud of how brave you've been." Mara blushed shyly. "Thank you, ma'am." Hayes turned to her too, kneeling so he met her eye level. "Mara, you deserve to feel safe at school. We're making sure that from now on, every adult listens." For a moment, Mara simply nodded, but her fingers brushed Blaze's fur with a steadiness that hadn't been there yesterday. This home, once suffocating with unspoken fear, began to breathe again. That afternoon, Elias and Mara worked together to clean her room. They tossed out the old, damaged clothes Fiona had forced her to wear. Blaze supervised from the doorway, tail wagging, whenever Mara giggled at something she found deep in a drawer. When Elias presented the new pale blue curtains he had ordered months ago, curtains Mara never knew about, her eyes widened. "You remembered," she whispered. "I always remember," he replied. They hung the curtains together. Soft blue light spilled across the room, the color of safety, the color of beginnings. And as Blaze curled at Mara's feet, Elias realized something. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a promise that Mara would never be ignored again, a promise that truth would no longer be buried under snow, a promise that Cedar Creek would change because one child dared to speak. Outside, children played in fresh powder, birds returned to branches, and for the first time in weeks, the Wynne house glowed warmly through its windows. And so, as the snow melted in Cedar Creek and light returned to the places where fear once lived, one truth remained. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest courage, and sometimes the quietest prayers lead to the loudest miracles. Mara's story reminds us that God's grace often arrives in ways we never expect, through people who choose kindness when the world looks away, and through the moments when love stands tall against injustice. In our daily lives, we all face storms of our own. But no matter how heavy the day feels, remember that God sees you, walks with you, and sends His light exactly when you need it most. Miracles are not distant. They live in every act of compassion, every brave choice, every gentle hand that lifts another. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us how it made you feel. And do not forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of courage and grace. May God bless everyone watching this, wherever you are. And if you believe that God still brings miracles into our lives, type Amen in the comments.